First of all, I just want to welcome the temporary respite that these 3 tranches will give people. And they're not tranches of €200 each, they're actually tranches of 187 in 3 bundles. And the way I would describe it is that these are temporary life-saving devices for people who are actually literally drowning in debt. The underlying problem is still not gone away, and these grants will help to cushion up to 20% of the price hikes that people face, but that means they still have to shoulder 80% of those massive hikes. And I reject the idea that this is caused by only the war in Ukraine, any more than the impact of COVID cannot be blamed on one bat in Wuhan. The pandemic impacted so badly and played out so badly for us across a social and health system that was riven by inequality, a dysfunctional health service and years of creeping privatisation, and that worsened the outcomes of that pandemic. And similarly, the war in Ukraine is not the sole cause of massive energy and fuel hikes. The crisis has simply laid bare a dysfunctional market system and gross, obscene profiteering that goes on in ordinary circumstances by the fossil fuel industry. And I'm sure, Minister, as somebody in the Green Party, you won't disagree with me, or indeed with Antonio Guterres when he says the combined profits of the largest energy companies are close to 100 billion in the first quarter this year. This grotesque greed of the fossil fuel industry and their financiers is punishing the poorest and most vulnerable people while destroying our planet. And hold on to that thought, because I want to come back to it when we drill down into what's happening in this country. It's incredible that months into this crisis, we have a situation where generators of wind and solar energy, or indeed those who profiteer from Corrib or North Sea gas, can rake in massive profits because of fluctuations in gas prices across the world. And this shows that market in energy is not only totally inefficient, but it gives us a system determined by the profit needs of large corporations. It exposes the utter nonsense of the pretence that we have a choice, that we can shop around, get the best tariffs, change provider, use smart meters to get the best deal. It's all a way of pretending that markets and competition deliver something that they don't, which is cheap prices and efficiency. We had a company up to 1991, the ESB, that was fully owned and had a mandate of not-for-profit. And when we went to deregulate the most efficient and cheapest energy company in Europe, we end up in this present sorry mess. And that story, I suppose, could be echoed across other elements of services in this society, like health, like broadband, like housing provision, where market mechanisms have been exposed for what they are, a shameless grab of public goods and services for private profit. The question of industry being in private hands must be reversed, and we have to move beyond the liberal dogma that says that we cannot assert public control over key services. That is why People Before Profit will be introducing a bill to bring in measures to renationalise the energy industry, and we'll be doing that over the coming weeks and months. In relation to this specific bill, we have an amendment to this one, which will try to introduce at committee stage to deal with one of the most egregious side effects of the deregulation of energy here, and that is the growth in prepaid meter use. And that's why I asked you to hold the thought, because it's often presented as a measure to help exert personal control over energy use, but in reality it's a direct effect of private for-profit companies seeking to shore up and to increase their profit streams. So if you look at the prepaid energy market in Ireland, you've got 3 big players owned by multi-millionaires. I'm not going to use their names here because I'd be told to shut up, but their net worth, the net worth of one of them in the top company is €65 million. He hits the rich list every year. Shareholders in one of the prepaid power companies had a €16 million windfall following an internal restructuring. The profits for 2020, and that was before the war in Ukraine, had risen by 27% to €14.2 million in one of those companies. So our specific amendment will try to help this government deal with what it hasn't been able to do, which is to show us how you can say, whether it's Minister McEntee or the Taoiseach or the Taoiseach, that no one will be cut off this winter. We're going to show you how you can do that by putting in an amendment to this bill, which I hope the government will not be reckless and will not reject. There are up to 400,000 customers on prepaid meters, and we know that the bluff of ministers in the last 2 weeks hasn't given any guarantee that they'll be able to stop people, to avoid people cutting themselves off simply because they can't afford it. I also think that it's bizarre that after 7 months since the first scheme, we still cannot guarantee, or maybe you can answer this, Minister, that those from the travelling community who don't have an MPRN number will not be cut off. It beggars belief that we haven't learned that lesson. And lastly, I want to say, as we approach COP27, it's worth pointing out that this crisis and the misery it has inflicted on people in terms of energy processes is not only highlighting the failure of the state to protect people during the energy crisis, it's also showing a bigger failure of the market in dealing with and addressing the climate crisis. Last year, we saw big corporations pull out from windshore projects. Shell and Equinor withdrew from major offshore projects in Irish waters, while their cheerleaders complain and blame the planning system and the state failure to give these companies everything that they ask for. Again, it highlights that if we are to address the climate crisis, just like the energy crisis, we have to do it by state-run, not-for-profit means. If we had insisted on this bizarre market system that we now have to electrify this country back in 1927, there's every chance that large parts of Ireland would be still in the dark. And if we are really to address the climate and wider energy crisis, it means reversing those neoliberal policies of the 1990s that brought us to this sorry position. It's instructive to look back at the debate in this House in 1927, and my PA did some of this work, when the same ideological arguments were trotted out. The danger to the state was that the idea that you would have a publicly owned not-for-profit energy market, it was labelled as Bolshevism, and deputies were warned about creeping communism. But oddly enough, I want to quote the minister who did introduce the bill and effectively set up the ESB, and he was no Bolshevik. He was a member of Cumann na Gael. Minister McGilligan then said that the state couldn't deliver the energy revolution it needed if it was to leave that to for-profit companies. And this is what he said: "The danger of handing over to anybody operating for gain such services as energy, with all the attended circumstances, were so great that it simply could not be attempted." That's a Cumann na Gael minister in 1927, and I want to echo what he said, and that's very odd for me to be doing that. But leaving such a key sector to those companies who seek to gain massive profits from the disaster and the poverty and the misery of ordinary people in this energy crisis would be even a worse disaster than that which faced us in 1927, because it also doubles and triples up with the climate crisis that we face. So I'm looking forward to the debate around this, and to the fact that you, Minister, I hope will accept the amendment that People Before Profit will put before the committee to ensure that prepaid meter people don't fall through the cracks, and in the future, when we attempt to reverse the damage done in the 1990s and to renationalise the energy sector in this country, that the Green Party will fully support us.